Let's all scream. Let's all scream. Scream, let's all scream.
Hello everyone and welcome to Let's All Scream. My name is Saleh Al Braik
I'm Shehlaa Ali.
And I'm Hassan Al Marashi.
and welcome to our latest episode. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing well. I think,
Yeah.
I don't know, the past week felt like a very long one. So it feels nice to start a new week and have a new episode out.
Yeah, I think the reason why it felt like a longer week for me is because it was our first working week post Eid. So
Yeah.
you know how you have the shorter working hours during Ramadan?
So
Yeah,
suddenly
that's
you
true.
break.
notice, yeah.
So I felt like it was longer, despite still working from home, which is changing, by the way, now.
Yeah.
I felt like, I agree. I felt like it was a pretty long week.
Long
How about
week.
you, Shehlaa?
I'm good. Today I went out for the first time.
Oh,
And I've gone out before and I've just driven. Thank you.
that's an applause.
But yeah, I've gone out before and I've just like driven around. But today was the first time I went to gasp a public area. Well, not really public, it was a clinic, but
Okay.
still like just getting out there and just being with people and seeing people. I was actually surprised to see how back to normal everything is. And
Yeah.
like I expected there to be an apocalypse outside, basically. So the fact that everyone's just back to their, slowly we're going back to normal life. It felt good. It felt like, wait a minute, you know what? Things are getting better,
I think we were talking about this the past couple of days about how, I don't know about you guys, but me personally, I've become less paranoid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna race to go to the cinema tomorrow,
Exactly.
but at the same time, I don't necessarily mind leaving the house if I should for a particular reason, that like an A to B type scenario. Like
Yeah.
I'd only go to a store or something if I needed anything. I wouldn't necessarily go to a mall and walk around, nor would I want to meet friends in like a
In like
cafe
coffee
yet.
shop, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think that's where I'm at too, as well.
Yeah, I'm more comfortable now than before about the idea of somewhat going back to normalcy.
Yeah, with me, I think in the beginning I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, as they say. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't see us actually going back to normal.
Yeah.
Now, especially with today, I feel like, okay, you know what? I could see how this is basically going to get back to normal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I felt good.
I don't
What
know.
about
I feel like I don't want us also to have like a false sense of security.
Yeah.
Like I obviously it's nice that things are getting back to normal, but I think there's a lot of people still very anxious and very worried about everything. So I'm like proceeding with caution. Let's
Yeah.
just
Oh, yeah.
say that.
For me, like the thing that I feel I keep on saying this, I won't be 100% secure is until I hear the words, that senior citizens or anyone above 60 and kids under the age of 12 and women who are pregnant, basically those that are
Vulnerable.
exempt,
Yeah.
and they say like exempt from going out or going back to work,
Right.
or going to them, they're not allowed in the malls, they're not
Yeah.
allowed in the supermarkets, which is still active right now. I don't think I'd go back to being 100% comfortable until they say, oh, all those groups can somewhat go
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
So until then, I think I'd still have my caution, but I
Yeah.
don't mind, like calling up a friend or two max and catching up at one of our
Yeah.
houses rather than just
I
going
mean,
out.
for me, I think the reassurance would come more when there's like, on the scientific side of things, when there's a vaccine, when there's like, we see the cases dropping globally. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not just talking here. And when we see people maybe the symptoms not being so severe.
But yeah, even with me, I get what you're saying, Hassan. Like I just today after I came back and I was thinking, okay, you know what? I'm comfortable. Things are like, it felt okay. At first there was anxiety. Don't think that I'm just like, oh yay. No, in the beginning there was like, it was filled with anxiety. But then towards the end, by the time I got home, I'm like, you know what, this wasn't as bad as I expected. So, but then later on, I was thinking, am I being just too hopeful? And you know that voice in your head in the back is just like, no, but don't put your guard down too quickly, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
As long as I think we all just take precautions. Like I was told that I can go back to work right now.
Yeah.
The first week, I have to admit, I wasn't so excited about it, and so I managed to get out. And alhamdulillah, I'm really thankful that I still have a place to go to work.
Yeah.
Secondly, I'm very thankful that they're very accommodating to our concerns, and they actually allowed me to have kind of like a comfortable return. I had a few colleagues that started last week, and they reassured me that a lot of practices have, they took a lot of measures to make sure it was safe for us to return. So I'm going back in the next 2 days.
How does that feel?
I'm less anxious. I'm actually more excited to see my colleagues.
Yeah.
Because I haven't seen them since March.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just excited to see them, albeit like at a distance.
Yeah.
But I am somewhat excited. So I'm more excited than anxious. But I know it's going to be on the day. I know it's going to be just this new way of getting ready, the new way of entering the office, a new way of sitting at my desk. You know, when you're sat there, you're just going to have all these thoughts come. And then the whole added kind of procedures of once I get back home.
Yeah.
Because I currently reside with 2 family members who are over the age of 60, I know I'm going to have to take extra precautions. And
yeah, exactly.
I'm going to have to, get my clothes, like probably throw them in the laundry and shower 3 times and, turn around 5 times. I don't know what's the magic spell to make it go away. But yeah, so I completely agree. I think it was only coming actually back and forth from your house and mine to record these podcasts. Do I see more people going out? And then it kind of came back the same feeling like you got, which is, oh, people are outside. People are going out. Oh, it looks like this is somewhat normal to what used to be.
Yeah.
But let's see.
Yeah.
In the next episode, you'll find out how my first few days back at the office is.
Yeah, good luck.
It's going to be different, I think, for not just for you or for us, for a lot of people. Like, because we've been at home for so long, we've kind of gotten used to it.
Yeah.
And so
like,
it's
this is a new
just
norm.
Like we had to adapt to this new normal. Now we're going to have to adapt again to go back to how things were, but not exactly like how they were, with very different and new precautions being put in place.
And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this on the podcast before, but my main line of work, I do run the businesses on the side, but my main line of work is in the tourism industry. So I'm going to be front and center on an industry that is all about this whole new
life
pandemic that's going on, and how do we have our jobs cut out for us, because we're working for the city on a tourism front whereby we're hoping to attract people to come and visit as a tourist destination. But how is that even? We don't even know what that's going to look like. So that's going to be pretty interesting to see how the next few months accelerate, and how people's perceptions about traveling, because I don't think, not to turn this into a tourism talk, but I don't think people are going to travel the same way ever again. Like, I don't think to me personally, I think I'm only going to be keeping in mind health, cleanliness, and safety when I choose my next destination to travel to.
That's true, but at the same time, you have to remember people are very forgetful, and
true.
It's just human nature that as time goes on and as this whole thing passes, which it will, I really believe it will.
Specifically, when majority of the world hasn't come into direct contact with this. They haven't directly been affected by it. I feel like they might be more prone to just going back to their old ways.
Yeah, and so exactly, like, people are just going to forget, and then, it's going to be maybe not exactly the same as before, but more closer to that than what we might expect.
So to open up the topic for this episode, we had a think the other day, and we never really like to pre-plan this. We usually just let our lives go by, and then on the day that we want to come and record for y'all, we kind of just feel about what our emotions are, things we've been
Yeah.
going through,
Or
and
just things that we've been thinking about.
recently, and then come up with a topic overall. So today the topic is going to be about grief, in all its forms, and I think we're gonna walk into those different forms, because I
Yeah.
think we all think of grief in specific ways depending on the things that we've personally experienced.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily have to be things we've lost. It could be things that have ended. It could be
Different types.
different types.
Yeah.
So I don't know who wants to take the floor and open it up on a specific topic.
Well, I think we can start with the most obvious form of grief, which is, when you grieve losing a loved one. And I know us three here have gone through that in different with different people.
Yeah.
And probably everyone around the world, unless you're maybe very young, has experienced loss in that form, where a loved one passes away. And I think it depends who it is, obviously. So for me personally, the most life-changing was losing my mom to cancer in 2015. And it was one of those things where it's going to happen at some point in your life. Obviously, no one can predict the future, but as a normal journey of life, usually parents die before their children.
Yeah.
So that at some point in your life, you're gonna lose your parents.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was one of those things where, so she was sick for a long time and she was battling cancer for a while, and it was a very painful, very draining and very difficult thing to watch her go through, but also on us as the family to experience. And cancer is one of those things, it's like, it really, if anyone knows someone who has gone through it, or if you've gone through it yourself, it's one of those things where it's not just like any other disease where you get it and people send you a get well soon card, or you just take medicine and you lay
feel-
low and then you're fine. It's one
Yeah.
of those things that impacts your life for a long time and sometimes forever. And it's very, very frightening. So when my mom passed away, it was one of those things where, because she was going through it, it was kind of, we were happy for her in the sense that we knew her pain had ended.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was like the worst day of my life.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking on the day itself, and I'll never forget this. I remember thinking, this was the worst day of my life, but I got through it.
Yeah.
Because it was almost the fear of it
Yeah.
Yeah.
was worse than the actual
Yeah.
event
what you-
happening.
yeah,
You
I
know what
can-
I mean?
Yeah.
And not to say, of course, I'm like, it still impacts me to this day. And it's when you lose someone like a parent, or maybe someone you're very close to, like a grandparent maybe, or
Yeah.
whoever, it's one of those things where you never really move on from it. It just, you think about it less and less.
Yeah.
And it starts to be, I don't say less and less painful, but the pain is dulled with time.
Yeah.
And obviously in the first year or so, it's going to still be very fresh, and it's still going to be very hard, but eventually I don't like to say it gets easier, because it doesn't. There are so many times and so many events, like especially Mother's Day is very difficult.
Yeah.
Where you think, so many people have their mom, but I don't.
Yeah.
And I know it could always be worse. Like some people lose their mom when they're very, very young.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just one of those things where you get past it,
Yeah.
and you just it just dulls with time. That's what I would say.
That's as you're speaking now, it's interesting to hear your side, because I've never actually heard that thought that you just said, Hassan, about how when you lost her on that day, you were thinking, this is the worst day, and I got through it. Because in my head, so at the time we were married, and I saw Hassan go through that day, and I remember now, I remember thinking from now on, he's going to need me more and more. Like, I thought that this wasn't the worst day. I thought that the next year, because you know how people always say that the first year is the hardest.
Yeah.
I remember on that day thinking, I'm going to have to be there for him 110%,
Yeah.
if not more, because he just experienced the most traumatic thing that anyone, like for me at least, thinking that is something that was very traumatic.
Yeah.
Even going through that day for us, and how it went, it was a very traumatic day.
Yeah.
So hearing him say that, for him he thought that, hey, I just got through the worst day.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me, because again, this is someone from a different perspective of the same day, and the loss of the same person
Yeah.
is completely different.
To what you had experienced yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think also those listening would know, and those who know us know that. So me and Hassan literally grew up together. So I think we're just under a year apart.
Yeah.
We're just under a year apart when it comes to when we were born, and so we literally grew up together. Our houses were always next door to each other.
Yeah.
We practically lived in each other's houses, traveled with each other and stuff and so on. And so obviously his mom, Allah yarhamha, was literally like a second mom to me.
Yeah.
And so
And we're cousins, by the way. I don't know if we mentioned this.
yeah, very early, like on the first episode.
Yeah.
So we're cousins, and that's also why. So for me, it's, you know how we said we all have different perspectives of that
Yeah.
day. I also have a different perspective and a different outcome of the grief that came out. Like, for example, from my side, I remember that at the time that it was, I was hearing from different family relatives that things were getting worse as her sickness developed.
Yeah.
And so if you guys recall, I brought this up in a previous podcast, and I used to use the word constant. And I always refer to those closest to me as constants. And the thing about constants is it's a friendship that you drift apart and you grow together at different points in your life. And at that moment, I remember, and Shehlaa, you also remember, I wasn't as close to Hassan as we always are. And it was just, actually, we had no reason. It was just one of those years that went by where we weren't as connected, I would say. And I feel at points in my life, I feel like that meant to happen, looking back at it, in the sense that when I did hear that Allah yarhamha, she had passed, that brought us closer together.
It was after that time
It
period.
was literally like a cosmic turn, whereby, like, we actually never grew apart since then.
And okay, this is getting like, very heavy, but I even remember as after I had put my mom in the ground, literally, I came out of the grave, and you hugged me, and I remember we were both just sobbing, and nothing mattered at that point. You were just there purely to comfort your friend.
I don't know if I was doing a good...
I don't remember.
I don't know if
I'm actually getting teary-eyed. I don't remember that at
no,
all.
this was like, I'll never forget that. And it wasn't
I actually didn't know you remembered that.
Oh, I remember that. Like, and we weren't like, we didn't let go until someone had, like, one of our uncles or something had said, okay, that's enough or something.
Because I think we lasted too long.
But I'll never forget that. And it's like you said, it was one of those things. And she always, like...
She used to always bring you guys together.
Yeah, your mom and my mom would always do that. Whenever we'd have our little disagreements, or even if we've just drifted apart for whatever reason, they'd always bring us together.
Yeah.
And there's few people, like, not just because she's my mom, I even experienced this when we lost your grandma, Saleh, from your mom's side, who's my dad's sister, for those listening.
Not complicated.
Yeah, so my aunt, Saleh's grandma, she also had passed away from cancer. And her and my mom were both these people that you don't find every day,
Yeah.
where they impact like so many people's lives
Yeah.
just by being themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember when your grandma passed away, Allah yarhamha, it was one of those things that shifted the whole family dynamic and
Yeah.
changed so many things.
Up until today.
Up until today.
Yeah.
And the same thing with my mom. After she passed, like, you know,
So many things.
so
has
many things
changed.
changed within the family. And it's just, it shows that there are these certain individuals whose loss you just can't get over because they were so impactful in your life.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that they were, you know, the loudest people or the most, you know, charismatic, let's say.
Yeah.
But just by their actions and by their behavior and their personality, they made such an impact
Yeah.
that their loss leaves such a big hole and a void that will maybe never be filled.
And I think that's one of the ways that people deal with grief.
Yeah.
Reminiscing, I think.
Yeah.
Reminiscing on the good times.
Yeah.
You know, different cultures actually have different ways, right, of
Honoring
honoring those
Yeah.
that have passed, and whether it's right after, you know, the funeral arrangements, or
Yeah.
or you know, 40 days after,
Yeah. Or the year.
or the yearly mark of the day that
Yeah.
they passed. Whatever it is that you do, I think, for me, how I process losing an individual like as in passing away
Yeah.
is definitely reminiscing, especially, and it gets much easier, I would say, and sad, like, and
Yeah.
tougher when that person has left such a huge gap. And
Yeah.
I agree with Hassan, again, not just because I'm trying to be biased, but his mom, Allah yarhamha, was very much a,
Yeah.
I would say, pillar of the
Yeah.
family and community.
Yeah.
So her passing did shake up the boat quite a
Quite a bit,
lot,
yeah.
and it shows you how I would say those that have a huge impact also have such burdens on their shoulders. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing, like
Yeah.
they were carrying basically
Such-
everyone's worries and making
Yes.
everyone feel better,
Yeah.
to the point where, you know, that when
They-
they
it
were
took the toll on
it took on the
them.
toll on
Yeah.
them. And that's why sometimes with my own mother,
Yeah.
I keep on telling her, you know, my mom also grew up with a lot of siblings, like you
Yeah.
guys know, obviously, and she used to be, and she is a listener. Hi, Mama.
And she is one of those people. She is one of
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
people that, you know, touches so many people's lives within the family and outside.
Yeah, I still remember one of the first times I met her. Also,
Yeah.
it was during, I think, one of the family gatherings when all your aunts came together here after we got married, and I remember there was a gathering, and so that's the thing. I remember there's only a few people that would stand out in a big crowd.
Yeah.
By the way, they are just so genuine and so kind and such a sweet soul
Yeah.
that I remember your mom was also one of them that just stood out to me until this day. I remember.
And that's why I told her, like, she did go through a period where she was just kind of overloading herself with everyone's worries,
Worries,
Yeah.
yeah.
to the point where when it hits you at a time when you see those passing away, you're just like, you can't do that to yourself.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you suppress, and you eventually, you know, it whatever it is that you believe in.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling like the more that you take on and people's problems you take
Yeah.
on, that takes a toll on you.
Exactly. Hassan went through a period like that where he was taking basically all the worries and burdens of everyone and trying to carry them on himself.
Yeah.
And I remember telling him, look, you have a first-hand experience by seeing your mom do that.
Yeah.
And I didn't want, and I would tell him at the time, I used to tell him, I don't want to see you get hurt. Because as much as that kind of person is a big role, it's a big role, and it can affect your health in such a big way.
Yeah.
And it can easily reach an unhealthy level. So I remember telling him at the time, like, look, you have to just take care of yourself first and then others. It's like the airplane example where
Yeah.
you have to put on the mask for yourself and then others. So that was always how I used to
Oh, hell,
explain
if
it
that
to
happens to me, I'm putting both masks on myself. I don't care.
But you know what it taught me was people like your grandmother, Saleh, like my mom, they didn't have a university education. They didn't have careers, but yet they taught people so many lessons. I mean, my mom for sure taught me so much, and they had so much knowledge and wisdom. And it just shows you that, and I remember my mom never felt like she really accomplished much in her life. But if you see the void that they've left,
The impact that
it
they've
just shows
done.
you that when you pass away, it's not how much money you had, it's not how
100%.
successful you were in your
Yeah.
career, it's not how famous or whatever, it's the impact you left behind.
Behind,
Yeah.
exactly.
And the
lives you've
memories,
touched.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
lives that you've touched and the memories that people have of you.
Yeah, and I mean, up until today, right? People come over to the
Yeah.
house when I'm around,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and literally everyone brings up, a memory
Oh,
of
yeah,
your
yeah.
mom.
Yeah.
Like they cannot enter this house
Without-
without saying something good, which I feel like is also something of how it makes, I think, grief a little more easier.
Yeah.
And I think that was the biggest lesson and the biggest gift that my mom gave me after her passing is to reevaluate how I treat others and how I want to be remembered.
Yeah. When you were saying about how these individuals are people who don't have an education and yet they taught and they had such a big void, my grandma actually was someone like that. And I don't know if you've heard a lot of stories, Hassan, or not,
No, you haven't really spoken about her that much.
because I wasn't really close to her, but I did see how she impacted the family. I was young enough that I didn't really have a close relationship to her because also she was in Iraq at the time and I was in Canada. But I did move to Iraq after she passed away, and I had visited Iraq before, so I saw when she was around how the family dynamic was, and then I left, and then I came back and I saw how it was after she had gone, and my grandma basically, she was pregnant with my mom when my grandfather passed away. So, and she had 7 children, and which she took care of and raised all by herself.
Yeah.
And so this is a woman also who, like you were saying with your grandma Saleh and your mom Hassan, they don't have an education. They don't have so much, let's say, book knowledge.
Yeah.
But
Let's rephrase that. They don't have a formal education, but
Yeah.
they were some of the most educated
They
people
were
I've met.
like my
Yeah.
grandma. When I would sit down and talk to her, she had so much knowledge in her that to the point where I was like, "How are you not
Yeah. Yeah.
again, like you said, formal education?"
Yeah.
Because these people, and it makes you think that, okay, you know what, if these people were able to really have this much information and to raise, for example, my grandma, when I would see her, she raised 7 kids all by herself.
Yeah.
At that time, this
Yeah.
is like what we're talking about, like 40 years ago.
Yeah.
It's such a tough challenge that you're like, okay, you know what, if they were able to do that,
Yeah.
God knows what we're able to do with all the knowledge and all of the things that are just at the tip of our fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I love what Hassan said, yani, about the things that you leave behind is honestly like the lives that you've touched. And personally, my greatest lessons that I continue to learn are still from my mom. So
Right.
my mom still, like, to this day would call me and give me little pieces of advice. And honestly, that's more valuable to me than any degree or certificate
Yeah.
I ever get. So I'm very thankful for that. One thing maybe to ask you, Hassan, is what advice would you give or about to people out there that may be dealing with grief in a way that you might relate to?
Sure. So I think the first thing I would say is, number one, everyone deals with grief in their own way, and don't rush it. You know, take your time, deal with it, because I've seen when people try to rush through grief and just get back to normal and try and forget, it lingers with them so much longer and comes out in so many other ways that are just not productive, not healthy, and end up negatively impacting their lives so much more than just, you know, just get stuck into it, kind of like.
Yeah.
Let it wash over you, let it, you know, consume you, and just go through the motions, deal with it, and then when the time is right, you will come out stronger. Maybe not feeling that way in the beginning, but later on you'll realize that the strength comes from realizing you don't need to sweat the small stuff. You don't need to worry about like little problems that don't matter in the long run. And the lessons that you'll get from it will be so valuable, and you'll kind of be at an advantage, I want to say, even though it won't feel like that. You'll be at an advantage because you've survived something so horrible and so traumatic that other people have maybe not necessarily experienced. And so the fear of that is kind of gone. You'll not to say that if someone else passes away you won't be sad and it won't be traumatic either, but you'll have gone through it already, so you'll kind of be prepared, I want to say. And the fear of it is what's worse than the actual event happening, the actual loss, I mean.
Yeah.
But I also want to ask you, Shehlaa, as someone who watched me go through that, and you had we had just been married just over a year, and you were new to Dubai, new to my family. Although you spent quite a bit of time with my mom because you were both at home at the time. So what advice do you have for people who know someone who's experienced such a heavy loss?
Well, see, with you at least, or at least our situation, like you said, I spent a lot of time with your mom. We sat at home, and I at the time was just going to university also, so but I had a lot of days where I would just stay at home and we would have breakfast together, and then spend the day until Hassan came home. So I really got to know her more than I got to know the rest of the family. With that being said, when she left, I felt a huge void that in our society that you have to fill.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that wasn't something that I was, pushing myself to do. At the time, I was mainly just looking at inside the household, meaning Hassan, his father, how are they dealing with it, and, his sisters. And I remember just thinking to myself, as long as I'm a good wife to him, that's really all that matters. But at the same time, seeing him and seeing the rest of the family deal with grief and dealing with losing, their mother, I would say let them grieve the way they want to. Each person grieves a different way. And this is something that I actually have said to, oddly enough, my mother, because my grandfather also, we lost him I think 2 years ago. And he was getting very, he was also old, and he was just getting very tired, and he just went through a rough patch. And I remember at the time also, each individual in our family was grieving a different way. And so my mom and I were sitting down one day and talking, and I was like, you know what, just let them grieve however they want to grieve, because you can't come and tell someone, oh no, this is how you grieve, or this is what you should do. Let them do what they want and just support them. Just, even though in your head it could sound such a ridiculous idea, but let them do what they want to do, and you just support them and just show them that you love them, because at the end of the day, that's all you really can do. And each person is going to do their own individual, they are their own person. So I think that's...
I love what you said about letting someone grieve the way that they know how to grieve. I personally, like I keep on saying throughout the podcast, that I am a very emotional person. But even I grieve differently, and it doesn't define the way that you grieve. I feel does not define the way that you care about those that you've lost. Because I've lost people directly related to me, and I've hadn't, slept weeks after.
Yeah.
When I would be so emotional day in and day out. And I lost people literally the same way that those others were related to me. And I, till this day, haven't shed a tear.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I didn't care about
them.
them equally. I just think that grieving comes in so many, and you learn, right? From different things.
Yeah.
I remember there was this one thing which I think I want to address to you guys, specifically, and your thoughts about it. But there used to be this person that I know that once said, like, you're not supposed to cry. Like, you're not, if you lose someone, don't cry in front of people, because you have to be strong. You have to be.
Sorry, who said this to you?
Someone, not to name names.
Okay.
I don't know if this person listened to the podcast, but it was a relative, and they basically said, maybe it's because I am a male figure and I am perhaps the eldest male in my amongst my brothers, but I was told that no, you have to be, you're a man, and you're a respectable figure in this family and in this community, and so don't cry because that shows weakness. And it was at a funeral, and it was to someone who was related to me. And I feel at the time I didn't process it, and I completely ignored it because I continued to be emotional. But I just wanted to know what you guys thought about that sentence.
Well, I mean, I have a lot to say on this, but I mean, see, this whole notion, and I think if you're listening to a podcast like this, then you're probably someone who also thinks that that's absolutely ridiculous, because this notion that crying makes you weak is just such an antiquated old line of thinking that just doesn't make sense. Not to cry, especially at a funeral of all places, where you've lost someone that's close to you or that you love. Or even maybe you're one of those people who just cries even if you didn't know the person, but just you get emotional
the story.
seeing those close to them cry. So not to cry when there is a tragic, sad moment in your life is to deny your humanity.
Yeah.
To bottle that up is actually the easy way out, because you're not facing your emotions, you're bottling it up, and it's going to show up in different ways, whether it's sickness, whether it's rage, whether it's you snapping at those close to you later on. You don't know how that grief is going to show up, so you have to deal with it, you have to let it out. And if crying wasn't natural, then we wouldn't have that mechanism in our bodies. You know what I mean?
Actually, I have a similar story that's that also same topic, but again, I'm a girl, so, and I am the eldest also. When my grandmother died, and we were in Canada, and I remember at the time I was in I found out that she had passed away right after school, and at the time I had a little study room in the basement, and so I went down there, I sat there, and I was actually sitting at we had like a little sofa couch, and I was sitting there, and I remember crying, just sitting there crying. And then I had a relative come up to me and coming downstairs and telling me, suck it up, we have people coming and they're going to take ياخذون من خاطر أمك, which is basically like
they're going to give condolences to your mom.
And I remember thinking to myself, why do I have to suck it up? And this woman wasn't even an immediate family. It was like a distant relative.
Please, for anyone listening, please let us know on our Instagram or Facebook or email if you've experienced some rando when you're ever at there's always this random person.
There is always a random person
that comes and
funeral.
Traumatizes you
at a funeral, and we never know who they are, and I've never seen them.
And she
any gathering.
And they'll do something that's memorable, and it's usually negative.
Exactly. Like till this day, I have to say, I don't think I'll ever forgive her, just because it was so traumatic to me. Like you said, at the time, I just sucked it up. I did,
Yeah.
just change, and then I went upstairs and I tried to help. She's like, "Oh, you have to pass out the tea or what?" I don't even remember at the time. I really just blacked it all out. But looking back, I find like such anger
Yeah.
towards that behavior that she did on that day. What would it have cost you not to come down and to just tell me, okay, I know you're grieving, but come upstairs and let's grieve together,
Yeah.
That, just saying that instead of suck it up and come upstairs.
And I'll never forget, like, during my mom's funeral, when my sister came up to me and she could see that I was kind of holding back tears.
Yeah.
And she said to me, you don't have to be strong, let it out. And I just, like, it
just let it out.
erupted out of me
Yeah.
like a volcano. And it was such a release and so nice. And I'll never forget that, like, that kind gesture.
Yeah.
And so that's all you need to do is, if you see someone grieving, back to your question earlier, what advice do I have? If you see someone grieving, if you see someone experiencing loss, just let them.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
tell them that it's okay to let it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this topic is honestly something that is quite deep.
Yeah.
It goes on so many different levels, and I'm so glad that we can talk about it, because honestly, coming from this region, myself also being a male, Arab, talking about not just grief but talking about emotions
Yeah.
Yeah.
is something that usually not a lot of people would want to step into this.
Yeah.
It's kind
It's
of
a
like
subject.
it's a touchy subject,
Yeah.
in terms of admitting that you somewhat have emotions and feelings. But I think it's always healthy, and I think also the way that I try to raise my younger brothers is to be very open with me in terms of whatever emotions that they're feeling, anything that they're going through, things that they want to talk about. I always believe like an open dialogue helps them develop into better people.
Yeah.
And especially dealing with emotions, and especially something like grief. You use the word, Hassan, trauma, so it is a traumatic experience when you lose someone. And I think if you deal with trauma, the last thing you should be doing is shoving
Suppressing
down
it,
and
yeah.
suppressing these
Yeah,
feelings,
exactly.
because it does leave such a long impact on you. So advice, don't judge people on the way they grieve, because we all grieve differently. Like I said,
Yeah.
I was on both spectrums in the past 5 years, and it just is the way it is. People, when you go through you're in a different stage in life, you obviously don't expect sometimes these things to happen on the
Exactly.
majority of times. So you can't tell where someone's at in their life at that moment in time, and maybe at that time it's just not working. I remember even that specific passing, someone came up to me and said, it's okay to break down, expecting me to, because they know I'm emotional.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just don't have anything in me. I'm obviously feeling loss and
Yeah.
grief, but I don't.
No, there are, and I feel like that's very normal, and especially like you said, I feel like in our society, at least in the Iraqi, culture, you're expected to cry.
Yeah.
Especially on the ladies' side,
Yeah.
with the women and everything. And in my head, if I want to cry, I'm gonna cry. But if I don't want to cry, I'm not gonna force it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a whole different subject that I'm not even gonna, get into. But
Yeah.
but yeah, like it
Let
is
people grieve
the
in
way they
their own
want.
way.
Speaking of, like, here, at least growing up, I'm not gonna, I don't want to say Emirati culture, because I don't want to get it wrong, because here, what is Emirati culture, right? It's so diverse. There's
Yeah.
so many different backgrounds. But at least in my family, and I can only speak from the men's side, I don't know how the women's side goes, because obviously it's segregated.
Yeah.
For those who don't live in or aren't a part of the society, what happens primarily when there is a passing of the family is that there's a 3-day mourning period. So when you lose someone, you have to bury them as quickly as possible.
Yeah, same
So imagine the trauma of losing someone, and then literally within the span of half a day, you've already put them to rest. And not only that, then the following 3 days, sometimes it starts on that day, or it could be the next day. For the following 3 days, you go through basically like a funeral in the sense that people come over to your house.
Yeah, for
To
3
give condolences.
Yeah.
And it's segregated. So there's a women's section and a men's section, sometimes not even in the same house. So for example, if there's if someone has passed away, the men's condolence
Go.
place would be in the son's house, and
Yeah.
the daughter's house would have the females, etc. So speaking from a male perspective, it's very you actually I can never recall. I'm 32. Not even one place that I went to give condolence have I ever seen a man cry, ever. It's always been talking, reminiscing, laughter. Not obviously a party,
Yeah.
but it was very much. And I don't know if Hassan, if you agree, but from my side, it's just a very chilled and like you go in, you give your condolence. You're obviously not gonna laugh like
Yeah.
crazy, but at the same time, you're with your cousins,
Natural.
you're with your friends, you're with the people who you know,
Yeah.
and you're just having.
See, I
kind
think
of
it
memories.
depends at what point you arrive. So obviously, if you're very close and if you've been there from the beginning, then you will have seen some tears.
Yeah.
But if you've arrived like later, let's say it's someone that you're not so close to or a friend or something, then maybe not. Maybe the very beginning of the funeral when it's the emotions are super raw and super fresh, then if you arrive later, then maybe you wouldn't see that. But I've seen both. I think when it's my immediate family that's going through it, then yes, of
Yeah.
course I've seen tears. But you're right. When I've gone to other funerals, where it's maybe a friend of my dad's or someone that is not an immediate relative,
Yeah.
then you're right. I haven't seen tears.
But that's what I want to say. I just
Yeah.
want to say that so don't misconstrue the fact that you'd go to these places and you
Yeah.
wouldn't see any emotions. Doesn't mean that no one has
Yeah.
any. It just means
No.
that we do it privately.
And
Yeah.
I've experienced a few Emirati ones, and then I've experienced several Iraqi culture funerals. I have to say, Iraqi ones are more emotional.
Yeah.
They are much more. You can cry even within the woman.
Yeah.
You can cry. You can shed your tears and really be there. And whereas with the Emirati ones, they are sad. Like you said, there are more tears. There are tears, but like you said, there's chatter and
Yeah.
and you can hear people talking and
Yeah.
then simple laughs here and there.
Because I think it's nice to. I always say it's nice to have a balance. I feel
Yeah.
like when you lose someone, you lost someone, but it also should be kind of like a celebration of the life that they've
That
lived.
they lived,
Yeah.
And
yeah.
they've touched so many lives. So I think it's a balance.
Yeah.
But we did say that this topic is, or I did say that this topic is quite deep.
Yeah.
So I think we've decided, more or less as we went along, that we wanted to do this as a two-parter for the first
Yeah,
time
exactly.
since we started recording podcasts. So what you've just heard is going to be part one.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to open the topic of grief into different aspects and go into more deeper aspects in part two, which hopefully will come out the week after.
Yeah, and especially because, like you said, I feel like it is too
Vast.
exactly, and so there's just so much that we can talk about. So I feel like it's a very deserving topic that I feel like it deserves another episode to bring up.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for listening. Again, please let us know. I know this was a very somber and heavy episode, but we felt it was very poignant and very key to bring it up. And we want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear from you. So please reach out to us. You can either email us on letsallscream.podcast@gmail.com or reach us on Instagram and Facebook at Let's All Scream.
We hope you guys did enjoy the episode, despite it being quite somber. But at the same time, this is the whole idea of why we started the thing we started. And this podcast is because to see whether or not people out there related to the way we feel, the way we think, and just to know that we're not alone in the things that we go through.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks all.
We'll catch you guys in the week after, and stay safe.
Thanks. Bye, guys.